Years had passed since Joan Felonzak molded Michael McKoy Senior into the perfect karate weapon, keeping the legacy of Sensei Dale Jenkins and Isshinryu Karate alive in Jersey City. Michael had become a master in his own right, and under his leadership, the dojo thrived. But time had moved on, and as Michael aged, the responsibility of the dojo and its teachings naturally shifted to his four sons: Robert, Michael Jr., Jaakson, and Jakob. Though they had all grown up under their father's guidance, each of the McKoy boys had wildly different personalities, and it quickly became clear that continuing their family's legacy would be anything but smooth. Robert McKoy, the eldest. At 19, Robert was the oldest and the natural choice to take over the dojo when his father eventually stepped down. But Robert's personality was like a storm, angry and mean. He often let his temper get the best of him. His approach to karate was aggressive and brute force-oriented, a stark contrast to the philosophy of balance and discipline his father and Sensei Dale Jenkins had emphasized. He believed that strength alone would carry the dojo forward, but his harsh attitude alienated the students, who feared him rather than respected him. Training sessions became more like battlefields. Robert barked orders, struck without restraint, and seemed to enjoy punishing his students for the slightest mistakes. The more his students failed, the more he grew frustrated, convinced they were not worthy of the legacy he was meant to uphold. The dojo's once thriving community began to dwindle, and Robert's anger only grew with each passing day. Michael McKoy Jr., the trying one. Michael Jr., at 14, had all the heart in the world, but unfortunately, no matter how hard he tried, he was terrible at karate. His kicks were sloppy, his punches lacked power, and his timing was always just a bit off. Yet, he had the strongest desire to make his father proud and continue the family legacy, even though the martial arts seemed to evade his grasp. Despite his struggles, Michael Jr. never quit. He trained harder than anyone else, spending hours practicing alone in the dojo, hoping that maybe one day, everything would click. But his brothers, especially Robert, would mock him, calling him a disgrace to the family. The weight of carrying on the Isshinryu tradition was too heavy for someone who couldn't seem to get even the basics right. Despite his best efforts, Michael Jr.'s inability to grasp the art only added to the disarray in the dojo. Jaakson McKoy, the simple one. At 12, Jaakson was, as his father often joked, dumber than the day is long. Jaakson was well-meaning, but his mind seemed to wander more often than not. He could never remember the proper form of a kata or execute even the most basic techniques. Instead of focusing on his training, Jaakson would frequently zone out, daydreaming during practice and messing up drills. His classmates didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he stumbled through training. He was a kind-hearted boy, but Jaakson's lack of focus and basic comprehension of Isshinryu made him more of a liability than a help. He didn't seem to grasp the seriousness of the legacy he was meant to uphold, often getting sidetracked by his wild imagination. His brothers found him frustrating to deal with, especially Robert, who would constantly berate him for his incompetence. Jaakson's presence in the dojo became more of a distraction than anything else. Jakob McKoy, the youngest. At 11, Jakob was the youngest of the four, but he had already earned a reputation for being mean and constantly complaining. Jakob had a sharp tongue and wasn't afraid to use it. He openly criticized his brothers during training sessions, especially Michael Jr., mocking his lack of skill. Jakob would complain about the difficulty of the exercises, the heat of the dojo, and the early morning training sessions. It seemed like nothing was ever good enough for him. Despite his bad attitude, Jakob had potential. He was quick and surprisingly skilled for his age. But his constant griping made it hard for anyone to want to train with him. He believed he should be in charge, despite being the youngest, and was convinced that if he were in control, everything would run smoother. His arrogance alienated both his brothers and the other students, creating even more tension within the dojo. The downfall. With each brother bringing their own set of issues, the McKoy Dojo, once a proud center of Isshinryu in Jersey City, began to unravel. Robert's harshness drove students away. Michael Jr.'s constant failures frustrated everyone, including himself. Jaakson's lack of focus made him a burden, and Jakob's complaining and mean-spirited attitude poisoned the atmosphere. Their father, Michael McKoy Senior, now older and watching from the sidelines, could see the legacy he had built with Joan Felonzak's guidance crumbling before his eyes. He had hoped that his sons would carry on what he and Sensei Dale had worked so hard to preserve, but instead, their personalities clashed and tore apart the very fabric of the dojo. One evening, Michael Senior called his sons together for a somber meeting. The dojo, once full of students eager to learn the art of Isshinryu, now felt hollow. The silence in the room was deafening as the boys sat before their father. "I've watched each of you," he began, his voice heavy with disappointment. "You all want to lead, but none of you understand what it truly means to be a sensei. It's not about being the strongest or the loudest. It's about discipline, respect, and the willingness to serve others. None of you have embraced that." The boys sat in silence, the weight of their father's words finally sinking in. Michael Senior looked at them, knowing the task of saving the dojo might be too much for them. "I don't know if this legacy can be saved," he said quietly, "but if it's going to survive, you all have to change. Otherwise, everything we've worked for will be lost." Whether the McKoy brothers could come together to salvage the dojo's future remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. The path to redemption would be long, and the legacy of Isshinryu hung in the balance.